Today's video is sponsored by Raycon. Earbuds are a must-have accessory for my workout routines. During the dark ages of the pre-Raycon era, I had to choose between quality and comfort. Raycon's everyday earbuds effectively provides both. Whether it be jogging or lifting weights, I can listen to podcasts, music, or even live coverage of the Raiders losing with crystal clear sound quality. And I don't have to tear up the inside of my ear canal to do it. Raycon have proven themselves to be a top contender in premium audio. From their everyday headphones to their everyday earbuds, Raycon provides quality products at an affordable price. But like with every great team, there's always room for new talent, and Raycon has added new additions to their lineup by expanding into home and power tech. Remove all that disgusting filth from your water supply with Raycon's new faucet filter, or charge up all your devices with the Magic 180 Cable Pro. With all-in-one compatibility with iOS, micro-USB, and Type-C devices. So as you're probably already aware, the day after Gobble Gobble Day is where a bunch of Karens get together at the local mall and fight over 15% off handbags, better known as Black Friday. These discounts are to die for. Well, guess who else is having a sale? That's right, Raycon. Oh my god, you guys are so smart. Shop Raycon's I almost said Black Monday. Oh my god. Shop Raycon's Black Friday and Cyber Monday sales for their biggest holiday discounts yet. Raycon is also offering limited time tech kit bundles, like the Fitness Audio Kit and the Everyday Audio Kit. These are just two of many that you can choose from, so select one that best suits your needs. But remember, these holiday discounts won't last forever. So make sure you seal the deal by November 27th. Go to buyraycon.com/522 and get up to 50% off site-wide. Big thanks to Raycon for supporting my channel. Links will be in the description. Back in 2007, we moved into a new house. It had been taken off the rental market because the previous tenant trashed it. But they were fixing it up, and we were happy to find somewhere that was within walking distance to everything. But after a while, strange things began to happen. Underwear and bras went missing. We kept seeing someone walking through our backyard. A bench had been moved to under our son's bedroom window. We padlocked all the gates, but we kept seeing this person walking through our yard. Then one night, when my husband was away on a work trip, I could hear someone outside the house. They had gotten to the fuse box, and soon I was sitting in the dark with my 2-year-old son. Well, I could hear someone outside laughing like a maniac while striking the front door. Of course, I called the police, but it took them 6 hours to get there. They dismissed it as a prank and couldn't do much. It really shook the trust I had in the police. In the following 3 months, we had attempted break-ins, and we couldn't work out why. At the time, we were young parents and had very little of value. We took precautions and had our son sleep in our room. We lived in constant fear and never really felt safe there. One night, we heard someone trying to open our son's bedroom window. This time, we drew back the blinds and saw a face. When the intruder couldn't open the window, he then proceeded to start hitting the glass over and over again, trying to force his way inside. We called the police, and I was able to give a full description of the intruder, but again it took hours before they turned up. While we were talking to the officers in the driveway, the female officer informed us there was a light on underneath the house. It was a storage area we had put things in the day we moved in, and had not gone in there since, and certainly had not seen that light on in the time we'd been there. They go and investigate, and found basically a bed made out of our old moving boxes, with some of my missing underwear and bras, and a stack of our son's toys and clothing. He had been living under the house. The police told us to padlock the door to the storage area, and left. It was some time later, the former landlord found out it may have been the old tenant who had been evicted before we bought the place. It took me maybe another 6 months to feel safe even hanging the laundry on the lines, due to the fact it was right next to the door. Even now, many years later, I still don't like storage areas and never really feel safe around them. For the sake of the story, you can call me Philip. I was 26 years old at the time. For context, I love traveling solo whenever I can. One of my favorite countries to visit is France. In February of 2019, I went to France and stayed in a town called Nantes. It's a settlement about 2 hours away from Paris if you travel by high-speed train. I really like this town. It's very scenic and always very lively, even during the winter months. I stayed there for about a month, and unlike most foreigners, I didn't just stay in the main tourist areas. I often took buses that would drive me to the outskirts of the town, so I could explore the more secluded areas. One night, at around 5 p.m., I took a bus to leave Nantes and got off at a random stop and aimlessly walked around a neighborhood. It was so peaceful and quiet. It definitely was not like this back home. I eventually came across a small forest. Once I entered, I soon came to a lake. I sat on a bench for a while and enjoyed the natural sanctuary. Suddenly, I felt the atmosphere drop, and I heard footsteps nearby. The sun was beginning to set, and it was already getting dark out here, so I couldn't see who was approaching me. The situation instantly made me nervous. I then heard a deep growl that made my hair stand up on end. I decided to get out of there right away, quickly making my way back the way I came from so I could catch the bus back to Nantes. But once I arrived at the bus stop, I discovered that I still had 40 minutes before it got there. So I stood there alone, staring out into the creepy forest, knowing that there was something that sounded like an animal lurking somewhere nearby. I was on edge, to say the least. In the distance, I saw a tall figure emerging from the trees. Soon after seeing it, I heard a cranking sound. "Get the fuck out of here," I said, not believing what was happening. I had an inkling of what the person was doing, but my worst fear was confirmed when I heard a chainsaw firing up. The figure then lifted it above its head and screamed. Then began charging toward me. Sweat poured down my face as my feet hit the ground. This was life or death, and slowing down could have meant the end. I was being chased by a chainsaw-wielding lunatic down a dark back road in France. A short time later, I saw a pair of headlights in the distance. By some miracle, a car was driving down the road, going in the opposite direction. The buzzing immediately ceased, and the figure disappeared back into the forest. The driver stopped and asked me what was going on. I tried my best to explain to him in my broken French, and he told me to get into his car. We then drove to a local police station and made a report, but since the French police are not very competent, and I don't think they even believed my story, I kind of figured that they weren't going to bother to do anything, and I haven't heard back from them since. The driver dropped me off at a tram station afterward. I thanked him, and he told me to be very careful next time, and said that France is not the paradise that people think it is, and there are dangers everywhere in the country. I still like to go exploring in the more secluded areas, but from now on, I only do it during the day. I grew up in a forested area, and I felt quite comfortable there most of the time. Nevertheless, I've stumbled into a few unsettling situations there that will firmly stick with me forever. This is one such occasion. I was 18 at the time. One evening, me and my two friends, Mike and Paul, decided to go camping. Well, maybe camping isn't the right word, since we didn't intend to spend the night, only to chill out and have some fun around the campfire for a while. The plan was simple: head out, build a fire, drink a few bottles of wine, eat something, and then head back home for a good night's sleep. We all met at my house when it was still sunny outside. We got ready and soon headed out. Our destination was this old abandoned quarry in the middle of the forest, which was maybe 40 minutes from my house. Even though this quarry has a tragic and frankly creepy history, it's a popular place to hang out. When we got there, the sun was already slowly setting behind the hills. We quickly gathered all the firewood we could, so we didn't have to look for it later. As darkness fell and draped all of our surroundings into impenetrable blackness, we all managed to get the fire going. We were in good spirits, and were getting ready for our first toast. That is when we realized we had made a horrible mistake. We had forgotten the corkscrew. We were trying to open the bottle without it, but we quickly gave up. The bottles were quite expensive, and we didn't want to damage them. At this point, it was clear that one of us would have to sacrifice himself and jog back to retrieve the corkscrew. After a bit of back and forth, I volunteered. However, I had two conditions. Firstly, they would give me a hatchet in case something went wrong along the way, and second, no pranks when I got back. Mike and Paul agreed without hesitation. They shoved the hatchet into my one hand and a flashlight into another, and sent me on my way. As I was jogging through the forest, I heard a noise resembling a wild boar. I suddenly remembered a warning I received from an older hunter a few days ago. He said it was around this time of year. Boars get very dangerous, especially at night. I was a bit nervous, but luckily I managed to survive without incident. I arrived safely back to my house, much to the surprise of my mother, who didn't expect me back so early. I explained the whole ordeal, and she just laughed. I grabbed the corkscrew and was now back on my way. Not wanting to experience the unpleasantness of a boar encounter, I chose another, slightly longer path, this time through an open field. After a while, I got to our spot. It was a small clearing bordered on one side by massive rocks, maybe 70 meters tall, and the other side was thick forest. Somewhere in the middle of the clearing was our campfire. When I approached it, I realized there wasn't anyone there, although our backpacks were still on the ground and the fire was burning bright. Great. We specifically agreed that there would be no pranks when I got back, and these dicks are trying to be funny, I thought to myself. I sat down near the fire while facing the woods. I wasn't in the mood for games, and I was getting quite upset. That's when I heard a snapping of twigs and the rustling of leaves from the edge of the forest, perhaps 30 meters away from where I was sitting. The sound was rhythmic, and it was undoubtedly someone making their way through the forest. I aimed my flashlight to the spot where the sounds were coming from. Between the trees, I spotted a tall person wearing a dark hoodie. As I shined my flashlight on him, he stopped walking, turned to me, and just kept staring motionlessly, even though he was directly facing me. I couldn't really see his face. "Paul, I know you're trying to scare me. We had an agreement, so stop messing around and come out." As I got done yelling, the hooded figure just turned around and walked deeper into the forest. Just then, my phone began ringing. Hastily, I took it out of my pocket. It was Mike. I answered the phone and immediately began barking at him. "Really funny, you assholes. I thought we had an agreement." What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about you trying to fuck with me. I clearly just saw you, so you can come out now." Mike didn't say anything for a minute. All I could hear on the other end was heavy breathing and Paul mumbling something in the background. When Mike finally snapped back to reality, he said, "Dude, we're at your house. We heard some footsteps, and at first we thought it was you trying to mess with us, so we decided to get up and go look for you. I forgot my phone at your house, so we couldn't even call you until just now. Get the hell out of there. We'll come back for our stuff later." "Bullshit. This is just another one of your stupid pranks, and I'm not buying it." Hold on a second." All I could hear from the other end was some incoherent mumbling. Then I heard my mom's voice. "Hey, what's going on?" My head was now spinning, and my heart skipped a beat as I realized they weren't joking. Suddenly, a freezing wave of fear ran through my entire body. However, I managed to convince my mom that everything was okay. This was all a misunderstanding, and she doesn't need to be worried. She gave the phone back to Mike. "Listen, just leave everything and come back. We're heading out now, and we'll meet you halfway there." "I'm not going anywhere alone. You better get your asses back here quick. I'll be waiting for you." "But..." I hung up. I didn't want to make any more noise than I already did. I quickly turned off my flashlight and started to back off from the campfire. I moved all the way to the huge wall of rocks. I figured that if the rocks were at my back, it would eliminate one of the possible ways this unwanted visitor could approach me. I was standing there, in complete darkness, trying not to make a sound while tightly clutching my hatchet, which for the next half hour would be my best friend. I had to constantly convince myself not to curl up into a ball. Even my own body started to betray me, as my hearing got worse due to my elevated heart rate. I was trying my best to calm myself down. But then again, worst case scenario, every bit of adrenaline would help. After what seemed like an eternity, I spotted 2 light beams coming from the forest, and I heard Paul shouting my name. I've never been so relieved in my life, and I finally ran out of my hiding spot and greeted my 2 friends. For quite some time, we were just standing there, laughing like a bunch of maniacs. We were even getting a bit cocky about staying. After all, it was just one creep lurking out in the woods, and there was 3 of us. It's funny, just minutes earlier I was shitting myself out of fear, and now I was suddenly full of masculine energy, thinking, what could possibly happen? But in the end, our better judgment prevailed, and we packed our things, put out the fire, and left. We took our bottles of wine to enjoy elsewhere, somewhere nice and brightly lit. I'm a female, 24 years old, from the United Kingdom. Despite a few creepy instances as a child, there has only been one time in my adult life that I have truly felt primal fear. My apologies if this is a bit long, but trust that I am being as concise as possible and need to explain the surroundings a bit. I live in a village in the middle of the English countryside. To paint an accurate picture of its size, it has a population of 4,000, but it feels more like 1,000 due to its spread out nature and being surrounded on all sides by fields, farms, and forest. It's kind of in the middle of nowhere, and because of this, it has notoriously bad phone and internet connections. Having lived here my entire life, I know the place like the back of my hand. I know all of the public footpaths through the forest and fields, where they connect, which are shortcuts, and where to cross deep streams, etc. I've gone on walks in this area throughout my childhood with my parents, and alone as an adult. Nothing bad has ever happened, and I always felt safe. This story took place last summer in July. After I moved back home from university, I had yet to get a job and smoked a lot of weed, a habit that my parents despised, which I tried to keep hidden from them by going on evening walks. I would have multiple pre-rolled joints hidden away in my hoodie pocket. As usual this day, I got home at 5 p.m. We had dinner, but my mom and I chatted for a lot longer than usual. She had had quite a hectic day and was telling me all about it. Because of this, I ended up heading out for my walk than I normally do, around 7 p.m. But this was summer and the sun was still shining, so honestly, I didn't really consider that it would start getting dark while I was still out. The woods closest to my house is less than a 5-minute walk away, and you enter through a gate into a farmer's field. You can see across the open area quite far, until the first set of trees obscures your view. That's where I was heading, as I knew that this track takes under 2 hours to traverse, and led back to the same path I was standing on now. More than enough time to smoke a couple of joints and for the smell to leave my clothing. This entire area is very popular for dog walkers, so it's not unusual to see other people while you're out and about. And since this is a village community, everyone says hello. I lit my first joint and began walking. I'm just in my own world for a while, until I was less than 100 feet from entering the forest. An elderly man was coming out, throwing a ball to his dog. I finished my joint and stubbed it out. As I got closer, I recognized it was a neighbor of mine who lived on the road next to mine. He was also friends with my grandfather. We stopped and said hello as I pet his dog, Max. While talking, I see another man emerging from the woods. He had no dog and was wearing a bright green jacket, very tall, and had at least 10 years on me age-wise. John and I chatted for another minute before saying our goodbyes. He warns me not to stay out here for too long, as it would start getting dark soon, which was true. The sky was bright pink and orange, and the sun was indeed beginning to set. I continued down the path towards the man. When we were nearly passing each other, I looked up to make brief eye contact, smile, and say hello, like everybody here does, even if you didn't recognize the person. My eyes instantly met his. He was already looking at me. His dark eyes were locked on mine. He wasn't smiling. I didn't know him at all, but I knew something was wrong. It was in his eyes. I swallowed my politeness and looked at the ground as we passed. I had lived in my university city the past couple of years, so I knew a red flag when I saw one, and my country bumpkin manners evaporated. I quickened my pace, quickly glancing behind me. The guy was still walking in the same direction, following John. I felt relieved, laughed, and cursed the weed for making me paranoid, while lighting up another joint, and advanced further into the woods. It took about 30 minutes to follow the path through the woods to the end. The pathway exit opens into another field that led to another set of woods. The sky was now violet, and the dimming light had been obscured to me by the trees. I was smoking my last joint and was near the entrance of the second set of woods when I felt it. Fear. Crippling, absolute fear worked its way like electricity coursing through every layer of flesh. Standing at the exit of the first set of woods was the man. I could make out his green jacket in the dying light. He had doubled back, and quickly too. I had looked behind me several times while I was in those trees, and he hadn't been there. For a second I froze, as did he. He knew that I was onto him. To sprint the distance between us would take him about 5 minutes. He was obviously in good shape. So I wasted no time and bolted into the second forest. It was the only way I could go, and I dare not look behind me. I sprinted for a couple of minutes before taking a sharp left turn, hoping to throw him off a bit, but I couldn't see a fucking thing. It was already beginning to get dark, and the trees made it 100 times worse, like fingers whipping and scratching at my bare legs so badly that I began to bleed. My lungs began to protest in pain, hating me for smoking so much before all this, while my heart was throwing itself against my ribcage, trying to escape. I couldn't run anymore, and I threw myself on the ground behind a very large tree. My back was against it, knees to my chest, hand over my mouth to stifle my labored breathing, as I desperately tried to pump air into my lungs for the next sprint. I listened for the first time. A few seconds pass. Then, I heard him. Heavy footfall snapping twigs about 20 feet behind me, but I dare not look in case he saw me. I had my phone on me, but I knew there was little chance of getting a signal out here, and I also knew he would either hear me talking or see the light from my screen. I'm not ashamed to admit that at this point, I began to cry, tears falling silently down my face. What the fuck? Where are you? I know you're here, I heard a deep voice say. I had to clasp both hands over my mouth to stop my scream from escaping. I can hear him moving around. I panic and found the courage to carefully peek out from behind the tree. He was about 10 feet away, with his back to me. I moved back, my eyes scanning the area around me. I found a heavy rock and picked it up. I carefully checked on him again. He was still facing the opposite direction, but he was searching through the trees, hunched down lower to the ground. I made a snap decision, and with everything I had left, I threw the rock to the right. It crashed through some branches and made one hell of a noise. I watched him immediately bolt in its direction, laughing like a fucking psycho, and listened to his footsteps fade away until I thought I wouldn't be visible to him if I moved. I ran, trying to put as much distance between us as possible, but I was also aware that I was getting further and further away from my house. I knew that there had to be a stream somewhere close. If I found it, I could follow it, as it ran parallel to some of the trails. I ran until the trees finally cleared. Then, the ground disappeared from beneath my feet, and I go head over shoulders down the stream embankment, crashing into the water below. My mouth was open and was being filled with muddy water. As I spat it out, I felt both relieved that I had found the stream, but then terrified that I had just gave away my position, and my phone was now ruined. I slowly made my way downstream, as quietly as I could, listening for him the entire time as the stream runs through the woods. I kept looking up periodically just in case. After maybe a half an hour, I noticed the trees began to thin out and realized that I was at the very edge of the forest now, where I would be able to exit onto a pathway that connected to the one that I had taken to get here. If I ran, I could make it home in less than 20 minutes. I dragged myself on my stomach back up the embankment, army style, wanting to stay as low as possible. I peeked over the top, and I could just make out the opening of the woods, about 50 feet away. I then began to scan the forest line for a couple of minutes, my eyes trying to make out any movement, despite it now being almost pitch black. I couldn't see or hear anything, so I pushed myself up and sprinted as fast as I could across the field onto the pathway. I knew the gate I had entered through was now a short distance away. I was so relieved.
"You fucking bitch!"
came a screech from across the field. I swear my lungs almost gave out right then and there. He had been waiting for me. I turned my head and saw him sprinting out of the woods, coming right for me. I screamed and pushed myself further, tears coating my face. All I could do was run. I could now see the moonlight shining off the metal gate. My house was just 5 minutes away after that. He was faster than me and getting closer, screaming at me the whole time. I ran as fast as I could, pushing myself over the gate, and ran up the road. I looked behind me as my house came into view. He was still following me. I raced up my driveway and threw myself through the door, running into the living room, crying and screaming hysterically. Pointing behind me towards the door, my dad ran outside while my mom grabbed a hold of me as I collapsed, shaking. It turns out that my parents had already called the police, as I said I would be gone for an hour, and that was at 7 o'clock. It was now past 12 a.m. I hadn't answered when they called because my phone was broken, and they became concerned. We called the police again and explained. They came and I gave my full statement. Both my parents and the police were horrified. Nothing like this ever happens around here. There hasn't been a reported rape or murder in the past 100 years, but one look at me and it was obvious that I was telling the truth. I was covered from head to toes in cuts and bruises, soaking wet, caked with mud and my own blood. I'm not going to go into how this experience changed me. It's quite depressing. But I will say that the thing that scares me the most is that they never even came up with a suspect. Despite him following me so closely, he was gone by the time my dad ran outside. And I'm left wondering, is that man still out there? And who knows what he is truly capable of? I am a 33-year-old female living in Fort Washington, Pennsylvania. I work as a graphic designer. My husband, who I will refer to as Dave, is the same age as me. This happened in 2018, when we were 27. This was the year that my husband and I rented a 3-bedroom house together. This was also the year that I started my graphic design career and got my first job. Most of my coworkers were nice and helpful. However, there was a guy named Max who became the reason that I'm submitting this story. From the moment I first met him, he gave me the creeps, and I never cared to interact with him. I admit that I'm very socially selective. I can like some people while not giving a damn about others. But still, I couldn't just ignore the uncomfortable feeling I had around him. It all started when we had to do a major project. Our demanding boss didn't give us a choice when it came to who we had as partners. So, of course, I was stuck with Max. At first, I was somewhat okay with this. He was very good at his job, but his inner creep began to reveal itself as time went on. He would ask me about where I lived, where I grew up, what my nationality was, what kind of car I drove, and where I used to study. I always tried to change the subject and focus on the work at hand. I even asked my boss if I could be partnered with somebody else, but the grumpy old man told me to suck it up, and his goal was for everyone to get along, because he doesn't tolerate social discrimination. whatever the hell that means. Max tried hard to be the nice guy. He would try inviting me to his place. He would buy me lunch when I never asked for it. And he would say things over text message like, "I can't wait to see you tomorrow. It was good seeing you today. You are very pleasant to work with." Ugh, cringe. I try not to think too much into it, but over time he began to get on my nerves. One day, my car broke down. The clutch needed to be replaced, so on that day, my husband had to pick me up. When he showed up, I got into his truck and greeted him. When that happened, I noticed that Max, who was also outside, had a very angry look on his face. It was the kind of look that a toddler makes when you take away their toys. But seeing it on a grown man was unsettling. Dave joked around and said, "Well, it looks like you broke your work husband's heart." I tried to lighten up the mood and responded with, "Oh, I feel so bad. I'm such a terrible work wife." But deep down, I knew that I still had to work with this obsessed weirdo on the final part of the project, and I dreaded going back to work the next day. When my husband dropped me off the following morning, I got out of my truck and noticed that Max was glaring at my husband. I will admit that Dave did antagonize him a bit, but Max was staring at him like Ted Bundy at a sorority house. My husband laughed at him and drove away. Later on, Max quietly told me in a low, angry voice, "You know I've been trying to be nice to you, but you've been nothing but rude to me, and your fucking husband better watch his back. Well, I didn't even want to work with you to begin with, so go fuck yourself." I decided to quit my job on the spot after getting scolded by my boss. I couldn't take being teamed up with a mentally unstable creep and having to listen to some old, out-of-touch boss condescend to me about getting along with others. No, some people you just can't get along with. Just ask anyone who's been through a divorce. However, things wouldn't end there. A couple of nights later, I was on my phone, trying to look for another job, when I received a message. It was from an unknown number. I opened up my phone, and to my absolute horror, it was a picture of my house, along with a text that read, "I know you're here." Another message came in right after. "You are going to leave your husband and be with me, or I'm going to make your life a living hell, you ungrateful bitch." I was absolutely terrified. I then looked out of my window and saw a figure standing across the street. I couldn't see his face, but I knew it was Max. He made his way across the yard to one of the front windows and tried breaking the glass with a brick. But thankfully, he was unsuccessful. Our windows are super strong. Then out of nowhere, 2 police cars showed up in the driveway. It turns out that one of our neighbors had seen him before I did and called it in. Max was arrested on the spot. They had discovered his car outside the neighborhood. When they searched it, they found duct tape, a hunting knife, and various drugs, the kidnapper's starter pack. My husband quickly came home as soon as he found out what was going on. I knew that Max was always weird, but I didn't know he was absolutely nuts. I'll forever be grateful to our neighbors for calling the cops when they did. I was about to call them myself after I saw him standing outside my home, but who knows if they would have gotten there in time. My name is Jery. I'm 28 years old now, but this happened back in 2013. I lived on the outskirts of Boston, and I was 17 at the time. I had recently acquired my driver's license and my first car, an early 2000s Hyundai. In the middle of January, my brother and I decided to go on a road trip. I'll refer to him as Carl. We would go visit our cousin out of town over the weekend, which was about a 2 hours drive away. The trip went well, and we had a great time with our cousin. But soon, it was time to head back. At around 11 p.m., I noticed that my tank was running empty. I should have planned this out better, because I didn't look forward to stopping for gas at this hour, but we had no choice. We eventually came to a poorly lit gas station off of a back road. Carl became very uneasy. "This looks like the setting to a horror film. Are you sure you want to stop here?" Dude, don't be such a baby. We're almost on empty. You can just wait in the car while I fill her up." While I was pumping gas, a black BMW pulled in next to us. A man who was about 6 feet tall, with long dark hair, stepped out and walked up to me. "Hey man, do you have any rock on you?" What do you mean by that?" "Crack, man. Do you have any crack on you?" "Well, everybody has a crack, but I don't have what you're looking for." This guy really gave me the creeps. After I told him again that I didn't have any, he stared at me with a blank expression, not saying a word. As I finished up at the pump, he suddenly grabbed me by the neck and pinned me against my car. "You think you can come into my house and swing? Huh? I don't know what the hell you're talking about, man. Get off me." During the commotion, my brother got out of the car and struck the man in the back of his head as he was reaching into his belt. He face-planted on the hard concrete. "Jery, get in the passenger seat. I'm driving." I quickly got in. Carl put the car into drive and floored it out of there. However, it wasn't over yet. My brother had the pedal to the floor, but soon, a pair of headlights were bearing down on us. The maniac had gotten back into his SUV and was now chasing us down. Our busted-up Hyundai couldn't outrun the high-powered BMW. He managed to get in front of us and block us from going any further. My brother slammed on the brakes and then put the car into reverse. However, the man got out of his vehicle and began charging at us with a knife, which was a very dumb decision on his part, because Carl put our car back into drive and sideswiped the guy, taking out the BMW's open door in the process. The guy was thrown across the road, and we got the hell out of there. We drove to a police station to report the incident, and luckily, my brother remembered the license plate. The police later informed us that the BMW was stolen. As far as I know, the man was never caught, and my brother and I never told our parents. We didn't want this to be the reason that we had to stop visiting our cousin. Carl was the one that filed the report, and he was an adult, so any follow-ups were made with him. Looking back over a decade later, I'm grateful that my brother saved my life that night. That entire situation was just nuts from start to finish, but it also made us even closer than before. This story will resonate with anyone who likes traveling to foreign countries, and will be especially disturbing to any parents listening to this. For some context, this happened in August of last year, and the location is Paris, France. My wife chose a hotel which was about a 45-minute train ride from Paris. What we weren't aware of was the worker strikes disrupting the service. So traveling often involved changing between buses and trains. As with any major city, the outskirts can be less desirable. Paris is no different in this regard. There were a number of incidents that set the tone for the day, some of which I was informed about after the fact. So there is me, my wife, and our 15-year-old daughter. My daughter is the main focus of this story. She's a very pretty girl with blonde hair and blue eyes. She would not, or should I say, shouldn't be mistaken for looking older than her age. The aforementioned incidents I was informed about was that a 40-plus aged guy followed us onto the train and winked at her. At the Eiffel Tower, some stereotypical pedo-looking man was caught by my daughter blowing her a kiss. I would have ended up in jail had I witnessed these events for myself. Anyhow, on to the main part of the story. We stayed at the Eiffel Tower until late to see it light up at night. Once the ladies were satisfied, we decided to head back to the hotel. Keep in mind, we were using Google Maps to navigate. However, my wife's phone was dead from all her photography antics, and I had forgotten mine at the hotel, and my daughter's was down to 20%. The bright side was that the final leg of the journey involved a 25-minute bus ride. We had a similar experience the night before, and being the only Caucasian people on the bus was not a new situation, but the vibe was completely different this time around. For one, it was late, around 11 p.m., and the bus passengers were all men. As we walked onto the bus, some big guy sitting up front muttered something in French as we walked past. So that instantly put me on edge. We sat toward the back of the bus, me next to my daughter, and my wife on the seat parallel to us. Nothing else seemed out of the ordinary at first, until my daughter became visibly distressed. I asked her many times what was wrong, only for her to tell me, "I'll tell you when we get off the bus." I'm now on high alert, looking around at people in front. There was a passenger who kind of looked like Snoop Dogg. He sat a few rows in front of us, facing us. He looked a bit shifty. I exchanged glances with him several times, while trying to see if he was doing anything to upset my daughter. It wasn't long before my daughter broke out into an uncontrolled sob, still telling me that she would tell me once we got off the bus. At this point, Snoop Dogg moved to the middle of the bus. In my mind, he was definitely the culprit. He then started chatting with the big guy from earlier. I knew that we were in trouble. I fancied my chances against Snoop Dogg, but the big guy would be difficult to fight off. All I was thinking about was getting my wife and daughter to safety. The bus gets to our stop. Expecting Snoop and the big guy to be right behind us, I told my wife to hand me the bottle opener we had gotten at the Eiffel Tower. It had a corkscrew and a very small knife attachment. Better than nothing. Luckily for us, there were still some staff at the bus station as we exited, so we made a beeline for them, which was when I got the full story out of my daughter, who was still sobbing. In a horror movie plot twist, I was told that neither Snoop Dogg or the other guy were responsible. The culprit was sitting behind her. I got a cold shiver down my spine as my daughter proceeded to tell me that the man sitting behind her had been touching her neck and hair the entire time and whispering inappropriate things to her. I was in complete disbelief and shock. Yes, there was a lot of people on the bus and it had been noisy, but neither I nor my wife noticed this guy touching our daughter. We explained the situation to the employees, who arranged an Uber for us since our phones were dead. We originally planned to do a 15-minute walk we had done the night before, but that idea was scrapped immediately. We weren't out of the woods just yet, though. As we waited for the Uber, a car approached the roundabout in front of us and slowly drove around a few times before speeding off, only for it to come back a few minutes later and do the same exact thing. I couldn't make out its occupants other than the car was full, and it certainly wasn't our Uber driver. It was definitely very suspicious. Being on holiday can give you a false sense of security, and that you are naturally more relaxed. But the reality is that you stand out and can easily become a target, especially in Paris. My name is Rusty. I'm a 25-year-old male. This story takes place back in my home country of Puerto Rico, in the city of Mayagüez in 2015, on Halloween night. I had just turned 18 at the time, and was starting college. For privacy reasons, I'll be changing the names of those who were involved in this story. Me and my friends, Justin and Chris, were in the mood to go to nightclubs to celebrate Halloween. A wise man once said, "Halloween is much better when you're an adult." and my friends and I were determined to make that quote a reality, and had been planning this night weeks in advance. Halloween came around, and everything went as planned, and we had an amazing time. Watching everybody have fun and drinking in their costumes really puts you into the Halloween spirit. That's tantamount to achieving something, because that feeling is usually reserved for small children. The clubs here shut down at around 2 a.m., but me and my friends were still in the mood to have some fun, so we decided to go to a gas station and grab some booze. After a few beers, I came up with a brilliant idea to explore this old abandoned house that wasn't far away from where we were. We were all drunk at this point, and decided to go before the night ended. For the record, this is not a paranormal story, but I might as well give you the context of why we wanted to check out the house. There is a local legend in this town, the House of the Mustang. There are many versions of this story. I'll tell you the one that I'm most familiar with. In the 1970s, a husband, wife, and their 2 daughters were going through a rough time financially. One night, when the wife and daughters were gone, the husband decided to use black magic to make a deal with the devil in exchange for fortune to help his family. After that night, the family's hardships faded away. However, as time went on, the family began to experience paranormal events in the house. Shadowy apparitions would come to visit them at night. There were multiple disturbances around the house without any rational explanation, and from time to time, demonic laughter could be heard, echoing through the house. One night, the family's Mustang suddenly burst into flames, which caught the house on fire, nearly burning it to the ground. It is unclear if the family survived the house fire or not. The property has been put up for sale several times, but because many of the people here believe this place is cursed, it sits empty, withering away from years of neglect. Neighbors claim that sometimes during the night, they can hear children screaming, as if they were being burned alive. They claim that mysterious shadow figures appear in the windows, and even hear the engine of the old Mustang revving up. There are rumors that many people have tried to remove the old, damaged car, but to no avail. Every time they do, power tools stop working, and even the tow trucks malfunction. It's happened so many times that they simply stopped trying to remove it, and no one could ever explain what caused this strange activity. Also, anyone who has tried to take anything from the house is said to experience severe misfortune in their lives. I was telling this story to my friends during the ride there, and we eventually came upon the house. The only way inside was by opening the garage gate where the old burnt-out Mustang was. We wasted no time exploring the home. After about 10 to 15 minutes, we decided to just chill on the second floor near a window and finish off the beers we had. We were planning to stay only a half hour or so, because we didn't want to be busted for trespassing. When we headed downstairs to leave, we saw a group of people heading toward the house. At first we thought they wanted to come and check out the house as well, but things escalated when we saw that they were carrying pistols. Through the window we saw another group of people approaching the house. Damn, why are there so many people coming here? Well, maybe this could be a drug deal, and we're just caught in the crossfire. Can you 2 dipshits speak any louder? They're going to hear us. Our suspicion was confirmed. The 2 groups were gang members, making a drug deal behind the garage gates. After a few minutes of hearing my own heartbeat, the unthinkable happened. One of the gang members spotted us looking through the window. Some of them ran away, however 2 of them came after us and ran inside the house. We had only a few seconds to react. Suddenly Justin remembered he had a couple of flash bombs in his pocket. They were fireworks that made a huge boom along with a bright flash, enough to disorient you for a short time. If we used them at the right moment, we could make it out of this alive. They were inside the house now. We ran down a narrow hallway and hid in the bathroom at the end. As soon as we heard them coming down that same hallway, Justin lit the flash bombs and rolled them outside the bathroom door. He had timed this perfectly. The gang members weren't ready when the flash bomb went off, and it gave us just enough time to push past them and flee the house. Unfortunately for us, Chris parked a few blocks away to avoid being caught. So we ran as fast as we could, but the gang members were now right behind us, and they were pissed off that we had outmaneuvered them by using fireworks. In a split-second decision, we decided to split up. Chris ran off to hide somewhere, while Justin and I decided to hide behind a parked car and a few trash cans. We were crouched down, trying to be as quiet as possible. We soon heard the gang members approaching.
"Shit, they're getting closer,"
Justin whispered. However, by God's grace, a patrolling police car came down the street. The gang members immediately ran off. Justin and I stayed hidden for a few more minutes, just to make sure that everyone was gone. We then got up and ran to Chris's car. Chris was already there with the engine running, so we just hopped in and booked it out of there. I was still scared out of my mind. We could have been killed, or worse. The criminal activity in Mayagüez is pretty severe. One of the residential areas is known for being one of the most dangerous places on the whole island. Even today, it's still a big problem in the community. This all happened almost 8 years ago, and I'm still very good friends with Justin and Chris. Chris joined the Marines in 2018, and Justin is about to join the military. I'm not too far behind. I'm planning on joining the Air Force and studying for my master's degree in criminology. Justin and I are planning to celebrate Halloween one more time before we part ways, but obviously we plan on being more responsible this time around. The house still stands to this day, with the husk of the Mustang still sitting in its driveway. I think it's best for people to just stay away from that place. When it's not being haunted by evil spirits, it's being haunted by gang members and drug deals. Anyways, thanks for listening to my story, and I wish all of you a very happy Halloween. Stay safe. My husband and I have lived in our house for just over 20 years. We are located in a small town, so we know most of the people in this area. Sometimes trick-or-treating in our town falls on a different night from Halloween. When this happens, we usually get a lot of out-of-towners coming through. My husband and I have a small fire pit on wheels, and have made it a tradition to have a fire going during trick-or-treating, in case people need to warm themselves up. Here in Ohio, it can get pretty chilly in October. My husband tends to the fire, while I pass out the candy, and make small talk with the people we know, and give my feedback on their costumes. One Halloween night, our town had a lot of trick-or-treaters. We were ready though, and we had plenty of candy to pass out, and things were going relatively well. Parents were coming up with their children. I would give them candy, and my husband kept the fire stoked and made friendly chit-chat with folks as they warmed themselves before going back out into the cold night. Suddenly, from the direction of our neighbor's house across the street, a young boy in a Red Ranger costume came sprinting as fast as he could. He looked to be about 5, maybe 6 years old. I thought the little guy was just excited for some candy. As I reached out to give it to him, he darted right past me and stopped about an inch from the fire pit. He then said in a slow, strange, monotone voice, "I want to be in it." My husband and I looked at each other. Did we just hear what we think we heard? The boy was mesmerized by the flames. It was like something in the fire was calling to him. As the kid began to lean over into the fire, a man who I assumed was the boy's father grabbed him by the shoulders and backed him away from the fire pit. "Whoa, buddy. What did we tell you about going near fires?" It was as if this wasn't the first time this kid had tried to go into the fire. They walked away and went on to the next house, but my husband and I couldn't help but think that we had just witnessed a future serial arsonist. We didn't recognize them, so we assumed that they were out-of-towners, and we hoped that's where they stayed, out of town. To this day, we still have fires on Halloween night. However, we now have a caged fire pit with a lid. That way, nothing but fire can be in it. Context. I'm a female living in the Midwest. I was 21 years old when this happened. I dated a guy named Stan for about 3 years. I met him in high school, and he seemed normal back then. We began dating shortly after meeting, and 2 weeks before he was due to ship off to basic training for the Army. Over the entirety of our relationship, I maybe saw Stan in person for about 6 months total. Most of our relationship was letters, phone calls, and online correspondence. I first noticed that Stan had issues when 4 days into our relationship, he told me that he loved me. Being young and stupid, I thought it was destiny. Over the following months, he began saying things like, "I love you. I would end it all if we ever broke up." He started experiencing depression and took medications resulting in violent mood swings and panic attacks. His mental instability, coupled with his alcoholism and self-inflicted social isolation, save for myself and his mother, made for one hell of a shit show on the horizon. Years passed, and I grew exhausted of caring for his fragile psyche, and tired of waiting for his 4 years in the Army to end. I broke up with him. That's when my personal hell began. First, it was the phone calls. I ignored them after the first hour. Then came the voicemails. "I love you. Please come back to me. You fat cow. You deserve to die." Then came the online harassment. He defaced my Facebook by calling me things like whore and slut on everything that he could. Things quieted down for a few days after I blocked him, and I tried to salvage what I could online. I received one last voicemail from him. It began with silence, and then there was a single gunshot, followed by 5 minutes of silence afterward. My stomach dropped. Had he shot himself? Did I cause this? I started crying. I didn't want to believe it. I got a text from him about 10 minutes later, saying that he hoped the voicemail taught me a lesson, and that I was going to hell for what I was putting him through. There were a few minor incidents after that, a changed phone number, a threat of a protective order, but eventually I put this whole thing behind me. Luckily, I had the support of my friends and family throughout this entire ordeal. I then came back to college from winter break, and pulled into the driveway of the house I share with 2 other roommates. I was the first one back. I get to the front door, and then notice that it was ajar. I started shaking. I should have just stopped and called the police, but I was panicking and wasn't thinking clearly. I reached into my purse and pulled out my pistol I carry for self-defense. I chambered around. That movement was the scariest thing I've ever done, but I did not know what was on the other side of that door, and things were about to get ugly. I opened it quickly, my gun raised. I checked the bedrooms and closets, then the living room, leaving my room for last. The moments leading up to when I rounded the corner of my doorway were sickening. The house was empty. The relief was so overwhelming that I began sobbing. It was then that I called the police, and they sent somebody over within the hour. I used that time to tally the damage. My room was destroyed. My roommates were fine. There were expensive electronics all over the house, left completely untouched. My room was the only one ransacked. Very personal items had been taken, perfumes that Stan had bought me, jewelry, a pair of high heels, paintings that I had done, my camera, my beloved satchel, covered in patches that I had collected during my travels, and other odds and ends. The most disturbing part was that all the hiding places I usually left my gun when I'm on campus were gone through. After filing a report with the police, I had all the locks replaced and told everyone of my suspicions. However, I never heard from Stan again, although I do know that he still lives near my hometown, and I make it a habit of never going anywhere I could possibly see him. I can only imagine what horrors he would have done if he had gotten a hold of a gun registered in my name. I have since moved out of that house, and am now much more careful with who I associate with. I think in the end, I came out on the other side a lot smarter. In my late teens, I began a serious relationship with my first ever boyfriend. In those days, I had zero confidence, no self-esteem, and a very warped idea of what a relationship should be like. The adults around me set a very bad example. Being so shy and innocent, I fell madly in love. I'm still not sure how. From the beginning of this relationship, my boyfriend was very controlling and abusive. Looking back on it now makes me angry, more so that I put up with him for 5 years. He hated my friends and family for no apparent reason, and I really had to fight to keep this relationship going. But as I got older, I got really sick of his shit. And when my family were going away for a weekend, I found the perfect opportunity to invite all my friends to my house for a get-together. Of course, when my boyfriend found out about this, he tried to put a stop to it, and attempted to guilt me into coming over his house instead. But I didn't let up, and my friends arrived at my house around 7 p.m. We were all sitting in the living room drinking, making small talk, and listening to music. But all night my boyfriend was blowing up my phone, demanding that I make my friends leave. My friends soon caught wind of it, and they were already unhappy about me still being with him, and the topic of conversation became my dysfunctional relationship. My friends expressed their anger and dislike of him, with the usual, "You know you could do better. You need to get rid of him. He doesn't deserve you." Generally, we enjoyed the evening, and my friends began to leave at 1 a.m. I wasn't afraid to be alone in the house, as I have a Rottweiler. She was usually friendly, but would protect me if I was in danger. One of my last friends was about to leave, but he hung back a bit to talk to me about my boyfriend. "Your boyfriend is an abusive, controlling piece of shit, and nobody likes him. I think it's best that you stop wasting your time and move on from him." I agreed with him, and we said our goodbyes. I then watched all my friends hurry through the downpouring rain back to their cars. I then went to the kitchen where I had left my phone to charge. As I picked up my phone, something in the kitchen window caught my eye. Standing directly outside of my kitchen, in the downpouring rain, was my boyfriend. He was wearing a hooded rain jacket and had a hate-filled scowl on his face. I screamed. He then moved from the window toward the back door. I knew that I would have to face him. I went to the back door onto the patio in the rain. He was standing only a few feet away from me. His breathing was labored, and his eyes were bloodshot. Before I could get a word out, he bent down and picked up a broken broom handle. What are you doing?" "You didn't listen to me, and now I'm going to hurt you." I didn't know what to do. My heart was racing. I should mention that I was quite drunk at this point and was frozen in place. He swung the broom handle into a flower basket above my head, which tipped sideways, spilling soil right down my shoulder. He then slammed down the broom handle and grabbed me around the throat. My dog must have heard him. She then came bounding out of the back door, leapt up and bit his arm, and began to shake him. Seeing the fear on his face was priceless. She eventually released him, and he collapsed on the ground, crying. He then confessed that he had walked to my house a couple of hours ago, snuck through the back door, and hid in a cupboard under the stairs, and had listened to every word that me and my friends had said about him. I took my dog back inside and locked the door. When I looked out of the window, he was still lying in the rain, crying. When he realized that I wasn't coming back out, he left, and that was the end of that. The thought of still being with him makes my stomach turn. Some background. My mom dated a guy named Will when my older sister and I were much younger. I was about 3 and my sister was 9. They had been dating for a couple of years, until she figured out that he had been doing hard drugs. So she broke off the relationship. He didn't take this too well, and began to stalk her, which leads us to this story. In the beginning it wasn't that bad. She would, coincidentally, run into him when she was out and about, as well as receive numerous phone calls each week, begging for her to take him back. Each time she refused because she knew he was still not sober. This infuriated him, and soon things got worse. My mom began receiving threats from him and no longer felt safe in our apartment. Because of him, I began to stay with my dad a lot more. I didn't normally stay with him because he was an alcoholic. My mother and sister would stay at my grandparents' house. As soon as my mom started staying with them, Will caught on. Within the first couple of days, my mom had woken up to a broken windshield with a rock in her driver's seat. It was never proven, but we knew that Will did it. After this fiasco, things began to subside a bit until nothing happened at all. My mom gathered up her things as well as my sister, and they moved back into the apartment. Months went by, and my mom heard nothing from Will. I soon moved back in as well, and things soon returned to the way they used to be, except I still would go stay with my dad on occasion. On a night that I was staying with my dad, my sister begged my mom for them to spend the night at my grandparents'. At first she said no, but after a while she gave in and packed up their things for the night. While there, my mom's phone number came up on the caller ID. She then knew that Will was inside the apartment. It took the police no time to get there, seeing as they had been called a few times before regarding Will. When they entered the apartment, all the lights were off. When they turned them on, they saw someone in a chair facing away from them. He stood to his feet, thinking it was my family members coming home, and gave the police a clear view of the knife in his hand. Will was hauled off to the police station that night, while some cops searched the apartment. First, they discovered a broken window. It was a first-floor apartment. Then, in the bedroom, they found that alcohol had been poured all over the bed, and shards of glass were everywhere. After that most chilling discovery, they then found a lighter on the bedside table. While Will was incarcerated, my mom came to pick me up from my dad's house and take me home one night. She came in to get me, took me out to the car, strapped me into my car seat in the back, then walked around to the front of the car. Just before she was about to open her door, she noticed a man in the passenger seat. She freaked out and ran around to the back to get me. While she was doing this, the man escaped. The police were called, and although my mom had cash and medications in plain sight, the only thing taken was some personal items from her purse, her social security card, and driver's license. It was obvious to my mother that this man had been hired by Will. Because of our broken justice system, Will was released from prison a short time after this incident. My mom had taken out a restraining order on him, but that didn't stop him from contacting her again. Will called and asked for her to take him back. My mom, of course, said, "Hell no." Desperate to be with her, he took extreme measures to get her attention. He figured if maybe he was hurt, she would feel bad for him and take him back. So using that rationale, He grabbed a gun and shot himself in the leg, knowing it wouldn't do much harm. But as fate would have it, he shot right into a major artery, and he bled to death. This story still gives me the chills whenever I hear it. My family never even told me about any of this until I was 12. If my sister hadn't begged to stay with my grandparents out of nowhere, things could have been very different for everyone involved.